The moment nobody saw coming. What if the loudest quote in women's basketball this week was not a trash talk line, not a post-game jab, and not some secret feud finally exploding into public view? What if the real story was much more human than that? Because when Paige Bueckers sat down with Sue Bird and admitted that she felt jealous and envious during the rise of women's basketball, the internet instantly did what it always does, it ran straight to the most dramatic conclusion possible. But here's the twist, if you actually listen to what she said, this story is not just about rivalry. It is about pressure, pain, missed time, identity, and what it feels like to watch history happen while you are forced to stand still. Source. Stay with me, because this gets deeper. At first glance, this sounds like another headline built to divide stars, split fan bases, and turn every facial expression into a scandal. But the deeper you go, the more complicated it gets. Because this is not just a story about Paige Bueckers. It is not just a story about Caitlin Clark. It is a story about what happens when women's basketball explodes into the mainstream, and two generational talents experience that explosion from very different places at very different times. And before we get all the way into it, subscribe to the channel, because this is the kind of story that deserves more than a hot take. We are going beyond the clips, beyond the outrage, and beyond the lazy narratives, and by the end, you may look at this entire conversation in a completely different way. What Paige actually said. Let's start with the line everybody is reacting to. On Sue Bird's podcast, Paige Bueckers openly said she felt jealous and envious. But she did not frame it as hatred toward another player. In fact, she made the opposite point. She said she has never been the type of person who does not want others to succeed. She explained that she wants great things for other people, that she believes showing light on others doesn't diminish your own, and that her real pain came from feeling like she wanted to be part of that moment too. She even described having days where she definitely felt forgotten. That context matters, because it changes the entire meaning of the quote. Source. That is a completely different story from the one some people are trying to sell. Because there is a difference between saying, "I hate what happened for her," and saying, "It hurt to watch all of this happen while I was sidelined and unable to be part of it." One is bitterness. The other is honesty. And if we are being real, that kind of honesty is rare. Why that feeling was so powerful. To understand why Paige's words hit so hard, you have to understand what women's basketball became during that stretch. This was not a normal rise in attention. This was a surge. A cultural wave. A full-on mainstream breakthrough. Caitlin Clark did not just become popular, she became one of the biggest stories in all of sports. NCAA records fell, viewership soared, and the conversation around the women's game changed in real time. Clark finished her Iowa career as the NCAA Division I all-time scoring leader with 3,951 points, a number that turned a legendary college run into a permanent part of basketball history. Source. And when that happens, people near the center of the sport feel it too. Especially someone like Paige Bueckers. Because Paige was never some random player looking in from the outside. She was a phenom. A star. A face of the sport in her own right. She carried massive expectations from high school into college. So imagine working your whole life for the spotlight, then watching the sport finally catch fire while injuries keep you from fully stepping into that moment yourself. That would mess with anybody. The human emotion nobody wants to admit. This is the part people don't like to talk about. Sports fans love confidence. They love dominance. They love slogans about hard work and belief. But they get uncomfortable when athletes admit the emotions that live underneath all of that. Jealousy. Envy. Fear of being forgotten. The feeling that the world moved on while you were healing. Those emotions are not flattering, but they are real. And in many ways, Paige saying them out loud shows more maturity than pretending she never felt them. Because the truth is, envy does not automatically make someone a villain. Sometimes it just means they cared deeply. Sometimes it means they saw the life they wanted happening in front of them while they were unable to grab it. Sometimes it means they were human enough to feel the sting instead of hiding behind a perfect public image. And that is what makes this moment powerful. Not because it proves some ugly conspiracy. Not because it confirms some secret hatred. But because it reveals the emotional cost of competing at the highest level when your career does not unfold the way you imagined. Caitlin Clark's rise was impossible to ignore. Now let's talk about the other side of this story. Caitlin Clark's rise was so massive that it did not just change her own career, it changed the scale of the entire conversation. Nike officially introduced Clark as a signature athlete and announced that her first signature shoe and apparel collection will debut in 2026. The company described her as one of the most watched and impactful players in the game, and also unveiled her signature logo as part of that expanded partnership. That is not normal star treatment. That is the kind of branding move reserved for athletes who shift culture. Source. So when Paige talked about feeling jealous during the moment women's basketball took the world by storm, people naturally connected that to Clark's rise. And honestly, that part is not unreasonable. Clark's impact was visible everywhere: records, headlines, packed arenas, non-stop debate, celebrity attention, shoe culture, brand deals, and now continued relevance at the pro level. Official WNBA listings currently show Clark at 21.0 points, 7.9 assists, and 3.8 rebounds per game this season, with career averages of 19.3 points, 8.3 assists, and 5.0 rebounds. Source. That is the kind of production that keeps the spotlight hot. But here is where we have to be careful. Recognizing Caitlin Clark as the face of a major basketball moment is not the same as claiming every other star secretly hates her. That leap is exactly where good analysis turns into fan fiction. The clip everyone is reading into. A lot of people are now going back through TV appearances and side-by-side interviews, trying to turn body language into evidence. And yes, that is where the internet gets messy. Because once a quote like this goes viral, suddenly every pause looks suspicious, every blank stare becomes a hidden message, and every quiet moment gets edited into a story bigger than the facts support. But if you actually look at the recent ESPN All-Star interview featuring both Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers, the transcript reflects a friendly, playful exchange, not hostility. Clark talked about teammates wearing her shoe samples and described a fun-themed pair, while the overall conversation included jokes, light banter, and a relaxed tone. There is no on-record evidence from that interview that Paige expressed hostility toward Clark. Source. That matters. Because if we are going to rewrite this story in a way that is accurate, we cannot build an entire emotional case on screenshots and freeze frames. We can say Paige admitted to jealousy. We can say fans are interpreting certain moments through that lens. But we cannot honestly claim the footage proves bitterness or hatred when the actual conversation does not support that. And that distinction is exactly what separates drama from truth. This is bigger than two players. What makes this story so compelling is that it reflects something much bigger happening in women's basketball. The game is growing. The attention is exploding. The money is changing. The visibility is different. And when that happens, every star gets compared, ranked, marketed, and judged harder than ever before. It is not enough anymore to be great. Now you have to be great and viral. Great and marketable. Great and constantly discussed. Great and impossible to ignore. That pressure can distort everything. It can make fans pit stars against each other. It can make media conversations more dramatic than the truth. And it can make athletes feel like if they are not the center of the moment, then somehow they are disappearing. That is why Paige's quote resonates. Because beneath the headlines, it exposes a fear a lot of elite athletes probably understand: if the sport is finally getting everything we dreamed it could get, where do I fit in? Paige's career was never a side story. And let's be clear about something else. Paige Bueckers is not some footnote in Caitlin Clark's story. She is a star with her own resume, her own fan base, and her own impact on the game. Official WNBA listings currently show Bueckers at 20.9 points, 6.2 assists, and 4.2 rebounds per game this season, with career averages of 19.9 points, 5.7 assists, and 4.0 rebounds. Source: those numbers are elite. So when she talks about jealousy, it is not coming from a place of irrelevance. It is coming from the brutally competitive reality that even among stars, there are moments when one player becomes the symbol of an era. And if you are another generational talent watching that happen while dealing with setbacks, it can hurt. Not because you want them to fail, but because you wanted a piece of that history too. That is a painful thing to admit in public. And whether you are a Paige fan, a Caitlyn fan, or just a basketball fan, you should at least recognize the courage it takes to say that out loud. The internet wants villains, but reality is messier. This is where the story takes another turn. Because the internet hates complexity. It wants heroes and villains. It wants clean sides. It wants one player to be insecure, one player to be attacked, and one moment to prove everything forever. But reality almost never works like that. The reality is that two things can be true at once. Caitlin Clark can be a once-in-a-generation force who changed the visibility of the sport. And Paige Bueckers can be an elite player who felt conflicted watching that rise while battling her own setbacks. Neither of those truths cancels the other out. In fact, they make each other more meaningful. Because the growth of women's basketball is not just a story of triumph. It is also a story of timing. Who was healthy at the right moment? Who got the right run? Who caught the media wave? Who became the symbol? Who had to watch from the side and wonder when their turn would come? That is why this conversation feels so raw. The real question no one can stop thinking about. So now we get to the question hanging over all of this. Did Paige Bueckers expose a hidden resentment toward Caitlin Clark? Or did she reveal something much more relatable, that even great athletes struggle when someone else becomes the center of a moment they dreamed of sharing? I think the answer is in her own words. She did not say she wanted others to fail. She said she wanted to be part of it. She said she felt forgotten. She said that pain motivated her. That sounds less like malice and more like longing. And honestly, that may be what makes this quote so unforgettable. Because it forces fans to confront a truth they usually avoid: behind the brands, the stats, the fame, and the debates, these players are still people trying to make peace with ambition, disappointment, and comparison in public. Why this story is not over. And here is why you needed to stay until the end. This story is not blowing up because of one quote. It is blowing up because it touches every nerve in modern sports culture. Because no matter whose side you are on, the admission itself is undeniable. Paige gave people something rare, an unfiltered glimpse into the emotional cost of missing your moment while the world changes around you. And that is a far more interesting story than the cheap version. The final take. So here is the takeaway. This was an elite athlete admitting that when women's basketball exploded, part of her felt joy for the game, part of her felt pain for herself, and part of her wondered why she was not out there fully living that moment too. And honestly, that might be the most human quote we have heard in women's basketball all year. If you made it this far, subscribe to the channel, because we are going to keep breaking these stories down with context, not chaos. And I want to know your take. Was Paige's quote simply honest emotion, or do you think it revealed something bigger beneath the surface?